So welcome everyone. Today is December 7th, 2021, and this is the bi-weekly Kubernetes release engineering meeting. I want to remind everyone that this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which basically boils down to be excellent to each other. So this meeting will be recorded to the internet, so be mindful of anything that you do or say in this meeting if you don't want it to be posted to the public internet later today. We have a somehow packed agenda. Today is the Kubernetes 123 release day, so we should get moving on some of the subjects for today. But first, I would like to give few minutes to any new attendees who would like to introduce themselves to the rest of the team.
Sure, I joined today for the first time. I've been lurking on the channel on Slack for a bit. Very curious to learn. I'm part of Mendix, where I'm also in a release engineering team. So seeing how Kubernetes is doing it and learning from that would be a great experience. So I thought let's join and see what comes out of it.
Awesome, welcome, Matthias. I mean, we're happy to have you here.
I'm not usually in this meeting, so I'll say hi to. I'm Xander, but I did just want to pop into this one to offer a brief and giant thank you to all of you. All that you've done over the course of this release cycle has just been truly amazing, and like we absolutely could not have done it without you. And so I'm sure I speak for everybody on the release team when I say just absolutely thank you so much for all that you've done.
Yeah, big +1 to that.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, we are part of the bigger team in the end. So I guess it's congratulations all around. Okay, so anyone else would like to say hi? Okay, if at any point you want to say hi in the future, happy to have you here. So moving to the first topic for today, it's the release managers update with Veronica or Nabrun.
I'm actually not seeing either of them on the call. My understanding is that it's a go, at least from our side. I've got, I believe there is a thread somewhere where we may have had, did we already do the stage? We might have already done the stage actually for the release. Let me just catch the scroll back real quick. Yes, mock stage and mock release are done. They were done as of yesterday. So once we have the go, no go from the team, we'll kick that off.
Awesome. So later today will be the final releasing meeting where the team will give their go and a go, and after that we can start the final process. All right, so first topic on the agenda is Stephen with the publishing bot access.
Hey, would you mind sharing your screen and cracking open that issue?
Sure, 1 second.
So the TLDR here is that as of, I think, occasionally we'll have fun issues that will happen with the publishing bot. If people are not familiar with the publishing bot, essentially what happens is we have a GitHub account as well as a set of rules and a config that is in the Kubernetes. It's under staging publishing rules.yaml, I believe is the name of the file. Basically, this file defines how we transfer information or content from the staging repos, or rather from the staging directory within Kubernetes into each of the staging repos, right? So if you're not familiar with the staging directories, essentially the staging directories stage the content for various repos that are then integrated into various things, right? So, Kate.io/API is an example, right? So the publishing bot is run by a few intrepid contributors, including Dims, Nikita, and Stefan. The publishing bot is also a release engineering subproject as of, I want to say, a year and a half, 2 years ago, as we started to kind of like merge all of the things under a single umbrella. Up until this point, we have not really taken control of the publishing bot and the infrastructure related to it, because there were people who were, well maintaining it, and also time is always the enemy. So I noticed this cycle that we ran into an issue maybe a week and a half ago with the staging bot, and I mentioned in the chat that I was like going to lurk but not really work on anything, because wanted to see what the release managers and the publishing bot admins would do. So throughout that, had lots of great collaboration there. That said, because this is a very important part of our pipeline, it is essentially a piece of infrastructure that controls one of the artifacts that we deliver to the community. It's important that release managers understand and are able to administer it as well. So this is TLDR. This is a tracking issue for all of the various things that we need access to administer the publishing bot. Many of these PRs have merged already. In addition, I've also, so a lot of them are owner changes or adds of the release managers as reviewers for publishing bot content for areas where we are already familiar with the process, say image promotion. We were added as approvers, so many of those PRs have already merged. So release managers, just be aware that you will start to be tagged on publishing bot content as well. I have, for areas that we are not so familiar with yet, we were not added as approvers. What I did was add us as reviewers instead, with a note that we should uncomment any approver tags that we have after a 124 is released. There are a few other things that are going on. I've added image building for the repo. We were doing manual pushes of those images before, and also targeting latest image. So that is kind of in progress right now. Pre and post submits have merged for that. And we'll start to, we've also tagged the first image, or the most recent image. The next phase will be, once the release is actually done, we'll pick up a new, we'll tag a new version of that and then release it, along with some of the content that is in the repo currently. A lot of the content that's in the publishing bot repo right now is currently held until the 123 release, because we want to make sure that we don't break anything. There is another aspect of publishing bot maintenance, because the publishing bot manipulates multiple repos. We want to make sure there's something called the Kubernetes Nightly GitHub org, right? And the Kubernetes Nightly GitHub org allows publishing bot admins to test whether or not the publishing bot is working, or whether or not changes that they have made to the publishing bot recently can actually do the thing that it's supposed to do without impacting the Kubernetes repo and the various repos that are under the Kubernetes GitHub org, right? So there's also migration happening in progress to allow GitHub the GitHub administration subproject, GitHub administration team, or the if you @ Kubernetes/owners on GitHub, that team, to allow them access to administer the Kubernetes Nightly GitHub org. In addition to that, an update to the documentation around GitHub management, adding Kubernetes Nightly as a community-owned org. And then outside of that, there will be updates to the release manager onboarding template to include all of the various places that you need to add release managers as reviewers for publishing bot stuff. So I think that's all of it. A lot of it's in flight. I want to say maybe 60% of it is merged at this point. Following that, the publishing bot is run on AAA cluster within within Kubernetes infra. I did not add us as approvers there yet. I did not add us to the RBAC there just yet. As we get to better understand what is currently happening on the ground on GitHub, we'll start to move into the Kubernetes cluster management as well. But I think that it's important that we get an understanding of what's happening with the repo management before moving into management of any infrastructure. So I know just Arnaud is on the call. Do you have any comments on the infrastructure stuff or?
Not really. I think you just need to make sure deployment to AAA is automatic right now in the future, because right now it's still done manually. So the only concern for me is how you basically, I mean, it's not a concern, you just need to add the Kubernetes manifest handling publishing bot in AAA. There's no real, it's not really that complex, because publishing bot is just a deployment in a GKE cluster. So there's really nothing to be concerned about it.
Cool, awesome. So I guess we'll add that task as well. Maybe we'll add that as a task that's kind of like a child of that parent issue, and then go from there. Appreciate that as well. Any questions from the crew on this? All right, cool. That's me.
All right. So thank you, Stephen, for the comprehensive update on that. Okay, the next topic on the agenda is Carlos with the KK branch rename. It's
Oh, okay. We got some feedback yesterday in our meeting, and I'm gonna make some changes in the cap for that, and like start as Stephen gave some feedback, starting like open some PRs to update the existing pro jobs to accept both main and master branch. At least this is gonna take some time. The idea for this branch rename is gonna be for the next year for around 1.25 release.
By around, do you mean directly before or directly after or during 125?
I guess gonna be like in the beginning of 125.
And that is, that is the optimistic goal. Whenever we do this, we want to make sure that it is happening not during we're always releasing not during the midst of a cycle, rather, right? So if we do not deliver on it for post 124, it would be post 125 and .. right? So one thing I want to note here is that, like, one, we should, I think I wrote this note and I forgot exactly what we were targeting for enhancements freeze 124. I think it is the I think we want to make sure that any feedback from the KEP by the time enhancements freeze 124 hits, we want any feedback from the implementable level of the KEP to be addressed and merged. So I think that's a reasonable target if we are targeting post 124. A note for anyone who is managing repos that are kind of outside of the scope of SIG release, as well as really the SIG release repos as well, to note that, like, any place that you have master in your code, you probably want to make it configurable. They're not necessarily guarantees that so for GitHub handling, we will, for GitHub handling, GitHub will automatically do redirects as long as a branch is only renamed once. Same with repo name changes. What I'm not sure of is any code that specifies like blob/master, if that will automatically redirect, if an HTTP GET will follow redirects. So just be aware that any code that you are touching that has master hard coded, you should strongly consider making that configurable. We will need to be very loud about this change, because we will not just be affecting the Kubernetes community, we will be affecting any, potentially all downstream consumers, especially if you consider things like test infra jobs that touch repos that assume that that the branch name is master, yada, yada, yada. Anything that is hard coded is potentially dangerous. And that is just, that's just considering what's in our purview, right? And, if anyone has a downstream, script that is doing the same, we don't know what's going to happen to them, right? So I would suggest one, being very vocal about this within the Kubernetes community, in addition to notifying on CNCF lists, TOC, et cetera, right? To make sure that the entire community, not just Kubernetes, is aware that this is going to be happening.
Okay, so any more questions about the KK rename?
Naively, not that I've looked at the KEPs, this might be answered. It seems like the optimal time to do this would be just after the release during freeze, not this release, the next one, obviously. Is that the idea? Kind of just before, release 124, for example, rename the branch and then unfreeze? Or is that going to cause problems?
I think that would potentially be the right time to do it. I would want to say the freeze is tricky too. That can potentially be a weird time. Like, it's definitely after release, right? At a baseline, right? We may want to thaw first, because there are multiple configurations that assume branch names. We're either going to want to thaw, or we're going to want to make sure that those configurations include main as a branch name before doing the thaw. But definitely after we drop the 0.0.
Okay. Any more questions, concerns? All right, so let's move quickly to the next two topics, because I want to give some time to the II folks who are here today. We've been hearing feedback about the salsa and encryption gaps that we have open. So we've been addressing some of the comments and the issues that folks have come up with on those caps, and we would like to propose a lazy consensus date by December 16th. The idea is that we've had these caps open for a while now, and we would like to see them merge so that we can start implementing and securing the Kubernetes release process.
And let's so the meeting that we were talking about previously is, so for those who are not aware, the release the SIG release leads meet every Monday to just kind of like thumb through the agenda and talk about things kind of from a management perspective. Let's make this the 17th instead, Friday, just so people have a solid 10 days and change. Just overextend an opportunity for feedback there. I think what was suggested in that meeting is that I strongly suggest we make sure that these things are tightly scoped. For Salsa in particular, Salsa covers multiple levels. For SIG release, we'd be considering basically 0 through 3. I think it's important to note for that KEP that Salsa level 4 is like an ideal state, which I think, given we need to have some language there that says, like, given the way our infrastructure exists today, we cannot ensure SALSA level 4, right? And in several instances, like if you consider just the fact that like the infrastructure is shared, one good example is if we look at the release process itself, it runs on the Kubernetes release test GCP project, which is a project that is controlled by Google, right? So so part of level 4 is ensuring that builds are hermetic and only appointed release managers have access to actuate and create artifacts. That is not, we cannot really ensure that because we are currently using non-community infrastructure. So that's one of those instances where, like, so you take the non-community infrastructure, you take another example would be the DEBs and RPMs that are generated. The DEBs and RPMs are currently generated by Googlers. So like until such date where we are fully off of Google owned infrastructure and Google build admins do not own the DEBs and RPMs, it will be impossible to satisfy SALSA level 4, right? So I think that we need to make it very clear that the intent of this KEP is to say that SALSA is a good idea, and that each iteration over this KEP, or if we decide that this is a meta KEP and we want to do KEP per SALSA level, we just make it clear that they're going to be per level, or we're only going to focus on one level per per iteration of per release or what have you, right?
Yeah, the last version I pushed, I tried to reflect a little bit about that in this paragraph here, and also I even renamed it to SALSA level 3 compliance. But feel free to read and add any comments, suggestions. And I've added, I also addressed Team Pepper's suggestions that we should not have like a dual graduation criteria. And I set the goal to reach SALSA 3. So please.
I would almost say that we go level by level and start like descope that a little bit, because I'm not saying that we can't do 3. I'm saying it would be nice to be able to say we have done, like, 0 is definitely done, 1 is definitely done, 2 is definitely done, right? And here are the things that remain for 3. I think a show of like, these are all of the things that we were working on, and we can kind of cross attach all of the existing KEPs and work that we've done over time, just to say that like this is implemented, right, as opposed to something that is going to exist for many years or something, right?
Okay, sounds good. So any comments welcome, and we'll keep the KEPs rolling till we reach basic consensus.
Can we also get a note out to the community today or tomorrow about?
I can do it. I have a draft.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll do that for that and the artifact signing one.
Okay. Yeah. The other one is this one here, KEP 361, which is about the signing of the artifacts and the proposed technologies we want to use to sign everything we release. So feel free to have any comments, suggestions to both of them, and keep an eye for Sasha's note probably in the following days.
Sasha, do you want to add any color before we jump into the artifact promotion one?
No, I just would like to get more feedback on this KEP. If you don't have anything, that's totally fine. But then if you just read it and leave it in LGTM, so other folks can see that we reviewed it and that we are all fine on it. Yeah.
All right. And for the KEP authors, later, Carlos, for the KEP authors, can you let's add for the people who have already done reviews, let's add them as reviewers, and let's just kind of like share the load of who will be approval. Like if you're the author for the KEP, then assign one of the other SIG leads to do the approval. And let's reflect that in the KEP.yaml.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, any other questions or concerns before we move to the next topic? Okay, so, okay, the next one is artifact promotion and distribution policy. I think Hippie, if you're here, or Rian.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, take it away.
Awesome. Last time we were together, talked about creating a KEP to go ahead and focus on the process for promoting our artifacts to multiple locations, and also for the accessing those artifacts via multiple methods. And this issue we turned into a PR yesterday, and I wanted to go ahead and promote and start the discussion on that. I'll also be meeting with this working group, Kate's Infra, in a couple of days, to maybe tomorrow at this point. It's quite early here.
Okay, sounds good. So would you like us to go and also review and add comments to the
Yeah. I think some of the things that it might be useful initially to get some is the current policy and process. I filled in what I thought, and the for the release promotion part, I think that's where we really need to hear and interact with the release, SIG release, and the release engineering. And the artifact distribution part is where we'll dig, I think, further in with the Kate's Infra working group. But they're very tied together, and I wanted to make sure that we were all able to get on the same page, this KEP being that page. We have a lot of research and stuff that we've done prior to now under alternatives and background.
So yeah, sorry, go for it.
It's important that we get to prioritize this, because we need to, we're the budgets, we're cutting into what we can start prioritizing for moving things off of the infra, because this is such a large percentage of it. And there's a graph down there to kind of show how much we're going to save. And if I were to guess, it's roughly around 150K a month for egress in order for us to kind of wipe out that. I believe it's the red area, Rihanna, if I recall correctly.
I think it's the blue area, actually. Or there's one that I know is because Eddie kind of reached out to me in the background. There's one that I know that is like consuming near 50% of spend just on egress. And so for folks that were not able to join us for the last maybe it was the last release engineering meeting, or
2 weeks ago when we were here, I think.
Yeah. So what is going on for folks that are not familiar? Essentially, so working group Kate's Infra was recently upgraded to a SIG, right? So working group Kate's Infra is started off as a co-sponsored effort co-sponsored effort by SIG release, SIG contributor experience, and SIG architecture, I believe, are the three the stakeholders, and they were recently upgraded to a SIG. So Kate's Infra is responsible for managing the infrastructure for the community, right? SIG release is responsible for managing the tooling and the artifacts that land on that infrastructure, right? Or I guess the canonical ones, the non Kubernetes SIGs artifacts, right? So when we started off, one of the first things that was written after a working group K8s-Infra was spun up, and by the way, the reason I put this kind of towards the bottom of the agenda is I think that this is something that we should talk out on the meeting, as opposed to like everyone go to your corners and do a review. Like the last, unless we have something super pressing, and y'all can shout it out. Unless we have something super pressing, we should review this on the meeting. So I'll give a moment for.
Thanks for saying that much more eloquently than I could at 4:30.
Okay, all right, so let's get into it. So, Arnaud has his hand up. Arnaud, go for it.
I saw one comment from you, Stephen, about basically suggesting K8s-Infra should own this KEP. So my question is.
Now I feel differently. So let's talk that one out first. Actually, yeah, go for it.
Basically, if SIG release can own this, that was what I'm asking. So.
Yeah. So I think the tricky thing that happens here is this is really something that is I think this is one of the few KEPs that I would say is like dual owned. I would, you could argue for either side, who is the primary owner, but it is, at least as the KEP is written today, the KEP YAML should be updated to be not architecture. Architectures may be informed in this process, but they are not the primary stakeholder. So that said, I think so I'll walk people through the background a little bit on the tooling. One of the first tools that was written, sorry, Hippie, you've got your hand up.
I just wanted to let everyone know that as we're collaborating on this, there's a HackMD link that is the current document. So in order to save the collaboration effort, if we'll just type an update in there, and I'll re-push at the end of our session.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, so okay, so one of the first tools that was written as working group K8s-Infra was spun up was a tool called CIP, our container image promoter, written by Linus and a few others collaborating on that work. The container image promoter does kind of as its name implies. It takes images from a set of staging repositories. The staging repositories are the way our infrastructure is essentially set up. One, we run on Google Cloud Platform. Two, there are multiple projects, including a building project. There are multiple projects, and these projects are usually, there's one that is the production project, or that's K8s Artifact Prod. And then there are a set of sub projects or staging projects. So if you see, if you ever see notes about like K8s staging -foo, right? It is meant to imply that that is the staging GCP project for foo effort, right? Foo sub project, right? So SIG release has maybe, I don't know, 7 of these things at this point. And every SIG has multiple sub-projects, and they have their own staging repositories. One of the first things that we wanted to do is ensure that SIGs had access to push to a staging project, so that they could play around with the assets and get container images somewhere, right? From there, this image promoter, or kind of in parallel, this image promoter was created to essentially migrate. It's essentially a G-Crane copy, right, from the staging project into the production project, right? The copy, however, is controlled by, in the back end, it's kind of simple because like essentially a tool runs and it says like it's essentially a G-Crane copy, right? What's great about the way the process works is we've wired it up with, we've sprinkled Kubernetes like things on top of it. So one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that the projects can be the promotions can be approved by sub-project owners, by reviewers, approvers within that area. And we want to make sure that the process, and through a pull request, we make sure that the process is actually auditable, right? So prior to this beautiful world, there are several images across the Kubernetes community that were essentially manually pushed into random repositories, right, for use. So some of the really important ones were the base images. So Debian base, IP tables, the controller manager, like a lot of these things were essentially like directly pushed from someone's laptop or something into a repository. So which means we have no way of understanding what's actually in the image, why it was happening, yada yada yada, right? So the reason that the container image promoter spun up was to make sure that these changes are auditable. And they are controlled by the community and not necessarily the original owners or the current owners of some project that lacks visibility by the community, right? So where we are today, right? So this kind of going through this cap. So there are two aspects of it. One is to enable, multiple providers to get involved in this process, and to kind of reduce our spend in a big way. But so it's reducing spend for the community, but it's also federating access to the images and the artifacts that we maintain. So the tricky thing that we run into here is that much of what we do today is Google centric. I think that that kind of comes with the history of the project, right? So if you think about the way we maintain groups, the way we maintain mailing lists, right? Those are done Google Groups, Google Workspace. And that is also code that is stored in Kates.io across the there's a group reconciler in there and a YAML config for the way we maintain mailing lists, right? If you look at the clusters are also run on their GKE clusters run on GCP, right? If you look at the container images, they are stored in Google Cloud Registry, or Google Container Registry, excuse me, right? So a few things would need to happen, right? So the existing code for container image promoter would have to support pushing to any registry. I'm almost positive that it does not today. We would have to, I think there's one provider in particular that is much of the spend. I think we'd want to coordinate with them to figure out, getting access to projects as well as credits on their cloud, right? To kind of do testing there. So there are, there's a hope to one, kind of homogenize the ability of the container image promoter to push to any registry, not just Google Container Registry, as well as there is also a need to support Google Artifact Registry within the container image promoter, or KPromo as it's called now. So that is kind of like the not so brief overview, I guess. So kind of the need on the Kates infra side is to be able to enable so there's we can talk a little bit about the cloud native credits program, but like the one need is to enable providers to provide us with credits and infrastructure to support this effort, and to the need from SIG release, more particularly release engineering and artifact management, to be able to support any registry. So I hope that sums up most of it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
But then there's also the other side of the cookie, right? Distributing things. So one thing is pushing them to the registries, and the other part is serving them.
Yeah. Absolutely. The KEP, as it's written so far, is pretty clear that those are two different but very intertwined things.
Yeah, so today, as I understand it, we have a registry.kates.io, or we have an artifacts.kates.io, I believe, right? That's used for file promotion. The file promotion process is not kind of used universally. It's something that we do nominally in SIG release. I think COPS is really the primary consumer here. So I think there are a bunch of different ways to slice it. There's, if people have heard of ORAS or OCI registry as something, I'm using the acronym.
We have an umbrella issue. If you look back in alternatives background for the migration from kates.gcr.io to registry.kates.io. And there's underneath that 2II, a blog we put out about gathering some of that data to help with the information to have it work. And also, I think we have 5 different implementation proposals for now. And that was where we started pushing back and, well, why don't let's figure out how we're going to hold this thing before we start picking up all the lovely tools to get consensus.
Yeah, and that I think that makes a lot of sense. So, looking at the kates.gcr.io, I am not necessarily too concerned with that part, at least from the perspective of SIG release. Like that is, that's roughly a, it's a DNS kind of like for us, it's something that we're not even handling. It's a DNS cutover, and it's like it's a search replace of kates.gcr.io to registry.kates.io, right? So I'm wildly oversimplifying the work that
we won't be able to benefit from the savings and cost until that other solution is in place, because then it would still all cost the same. It would just be promoted to different areas, because in order for when somebody's using kubeadmin, for example, to set up a cluster, those URLs default to the main location. And even if we update all of the code base across all of the community to use the new URL, if that URL doesn't intelligently select the right mirror, as currently people in China won't be able to access our community's artifacts. And also, if you're depending on your provider, you're not going to be able to benefit from the mirrors that provider has. So this is why this is all meshed together into one KEP, because it's going to require that collaboration between the SIG Kates infra and this group and the contributor experience along the way.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, I haven't seen this one in a while. Actually, I'm just going through the old the registry.kates.io one. So I'd mentioned that there are a few. We have a tracking epic for this as well, kind of on the artifact management side. I think, for our management concerns are more around how do we get something from one place to another. Whereas for Kates Infra, it's going to be like, what is that place, right? So not to say that we don't care about that part. We do care about that part. But from our day-to-day, we won't as much, right? So that's good for us. But I think, I think the more important work, or rather the work that we'll have to focus on is kind of allowing the artifact promoter to support multiple registries. Like once that happens, we also had a conversation the previous meeting around, well, can this be done in phases? What would be the policy for what would be the policy for promotion, right? Is it to continue to promote to the original locations, and then and then kind of follow up with some sort of sync to additional registries, or is it to make all of the registries first-class citizens, right? And I think that's in an ideal world, all registries are first-class citizens. But in the world that we're in right now, it would probably be like, let's figure out how to get it across multiple registries. while we're also figuring out how to make every registry a first-class citizen. And I say that largely it's a staffing problem. I am probably one of the only people who works actively on the image promoter code. And there are a few release managers that are starting to get involved in it, but it is it's going slowly, I'll say. Arnaud, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just curious about something. Why just not ask to the main cloud provider to mirror Kate's artifact prod? Because I know Amazon recently released a pull through cache for the registry. Google has its own mirror. Microsoft has its own mirror. Why just not ask them to just mirror Kate's artifact prod and make sure the managed services for Kubernetes can directly use those mirror?
I think that's a reasonable solution. I think it's, yeah, I mean, we'd have to, yeah, that's a reasonable solution. I think I'm trying to think of like what else we would have to do to ensure that the community feels like, if I'm a developer who is working on some sub-project within the community, and I only have access to resources on AWS, say, or Azure, say, can we as a community ensure that the access is equitable across the board, right? With the mirroring, we can't. At the same time, you could argue that because we give people access to view, edit, modify their staging repositories, then it should be less of an issue if we're deciding that a mirror is just the solution that we're going to go with, right? If the mirror is not the solution that we're going to go with, then that means we have to have the same level of ability to manipulate sub projects across multiple clouds, right? And is that a thing that we want to do? Jesse, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think you just nailed part of what my thoughts are. So I think looking at things like pull through cache or mirroring within cloud providers could be a kind of a partial solution here. I think a full solution with a gateway and mirroring that's owned by the project, that's maintained by the project, feels a lot more correct to me. I think it keeps control of management of traffic and metrics and stuff with the project. Also, I think you had touched on this before. It's the matter of just going through some scripts and doing sort of a sed replace is much simpler, where if we look at the various pull through cache and mirroring capabilities of commercial registries, it's going to be different from provider to provider. So that's another reason that I think, sort of the project owning a solution here makes more sense to me. Certainly, not representing AWS here, but we're willing to work with the project and want this to work and want it to be successful, and certainly don't want to see egress charges like that coming through donation funds, right? So that's the bottom line. Whatever the project thinks is the right thing, I'm pretty sure most of the major cloud providers would get behind. But technically, I like a solution that keeps ownership and control with the project and is as simple as possible. That's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm thinking about it more. Something that would concern me is any expectation that we would be able to spin up and maintain infrastructure across N clouds to enable people to do kind of like play around in sub projects, right? I imagine that would be a reasonable amount of overhead for SIG Kate's Infra to take on.
One of the things that we were looking at with the reg.kates.io different solutions is being able to have that mapping for the different, I won't call it buckets because we don't use it consistently yet. Sometimes we use a top level kates.gcr.io/image name, and sometimes we use kates.gcr.io/bucket. But
So,
go ahead.
yeah, so something around that is that the only reason we're doing that is legacy purposes, right? During the end, Arnaud actually links the a little earlier in the agenda, or a little earlier in the chat. He links the talk that Linus and I gave for KubeCon around some of this migration process. I think that so the reason that the top level ones exist is strictly legacy. We wanted to make sure we didn't break anyone.
Okay.
So images in general for newer sub projects should all be bucketed. Images that are handled that are kind of like canonical community images. If you look at like API server, scheduler, controller manager, yada yada yada, those are written to both the those are written both to the Kate's artifact prod /Kubernetes /image name, as well as Kate's artifacts prod /image name, just to ensure that any downstream consumers that are not using the bucketed version of it do not break.
No. I guess the reason I brought this up was about us being able to get metrics and being able to control where things go. I don't think it's a huge amount of overhead if when a provider gets onboarded, we go ahead and create that mapping because it's public and we can see where those redirections are occurring in order to do, in this case, like these backwards compatible vanity image names. I know that I was speaking with some of the Amazon crew around making sure that we've already reserved the bucket names that we use currently within GCR. So that should be a clean migration there, but it wasn't a requirement. It's just nice. If we go them community owned, for lack of a better term, buckets.
Yeah. So I'm wondering I'm really liking the idea of like the cache, and I would leave it to like provider caches. I would leave it to Kate's Infra to weigh in on how they feel. Okay. But that seems like, I think that's going to be the option with the lowest overhead for them in terms of like, so for a lot of the scripts, the Kate's Infra stuff started off as like basically as we do in everywhere in Kubernetes, it starts off as some make files and some shell scripts, right? And that has evolved into Terraform. There have been other chats about I think Pulumi and control plane stuff at some point. I don't know where the current conversation is going, but I would say that if we have an expectation that people are going to be able to operate on these clouds, we'd have to build out infrastructure for each and every one of them, right? And given the fact that we are not completely migrated off of all of those shell scripts, even for GCP, that would be were I making a decision with a Kate's Infra hat on, it would be a hard sell for me. But Arnaud is on the call, and Arnaud is actually a lead for Kate's Infra, so I'll let him weigh in too.
I'm sorry, I was lost for like 2 minutes. What was the comment?
So basically, I think I'm kind of feeling that the shell script to Terraform migration for maintaining projects is not even done for GCP, right? So it would worry me to then multiply that by N cloud providers, right? I think having doing caching on multiple providers is a lot more attractive just because of saving overhead for the Kate's Infra team.
well, the question is, do we have to maintain those registries? Because we can ask the cloud provider to maintain them. So if we decide to add support of multi registries to image promoter, we can basically talk to the cloud provider and say, oh, you should maintain them. We don't necessarily need to maintain those registries.
Yeah.
Because if we decide to push all the registries to different cloud provider, it can be endless because maybe 10 cloud provider are gonna be interested to have those registries inside the network. So it's not only Google and Amazon, Microsoft. You can basically have an endless list of people interested to do that. So I'm more interested to have a technical involvement from the cloud providers instead on catering from maintaining all those registries.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so basically what I'm saying is like, it would be nice if the response, like Kate's Infra did not have the responsibility of spinning up all of the staging projects, right? Per cloud provider. If the only responsibility was to ensure that things somehow were mirrored across to multiple registries, across multiple providers, that is an easier sell than having to maintain infrastructure for X cloud providers.
But is the one goal to have the staging mirrored as well, or just the actual final distribution buckets?
Right. I'm thinking that maybe that doesn't need to be a goal. Like if we're only concerned with the final product, right? Then we don't need to be concerned with doing the sub project stuff as well.
Yeah, because that's where the actual spending comes from, right?
Well, no, it's tricky because not quite, right. The spending comes from egress in GCP, right? So the intra GCP cost is probably pretty low, right? In comparison to who is actually doing the polls on the production images, right? So if we're landing everything in GCP and then cloud providers are mirroring that, right? That is, so we're gonna pay the continuous cost of doing the mirrors as opposed to the cost of as opposed to the cost of consumers pulling the image every time.
Exactly, of just distributing to the mirrors and that's it.
Right.
We'll have this on the agenda for tomorrow's SIG Kate's Infra call. And I'd encourage anyone who wants to be involved in to comment and edit heavily. You can do it right on the HackMD if you want. And then we can get together tomorrow and push forward on the is it tomorrow or is it in 2 days?
There's one tomorrow. Yeah, there's one tomorrow. Release managers, do we have anyone who's able to attend that call?
I'm not sure yet. I think my meeting that clashes with the Kate Cifra has been canceled. I'll try to make it if I can.
Cool. And so, do we have
little warning? I'm sorry, little warning about tomorrow. Tomorrow is the last meeting for Kate Cifra, so we may not be able to cover that subject depending of the subject we have to talk about tomorrow. So it's gonna be added to the agenda, but just warning, we may not cover that subject because tomorrow is last meeting and I want to basically do a ritual of the year.
Fair.
Gotcha. All right, so I think next steps at the very, so given everything that we said, and Arnaud, since I think we can at least make a call on who should own this before we go. It's clear that both SIGs own it.
You. Yo, six release.
Hot data.
I can send cheese and wine if that means it's help SIG release help it. So SIG release should own it. Yeah. You just give me an address and I send the cheese and the wine.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you're selling it. You're selling it. SIG leads, are we okay with that? Any SIG leads left? No, Adolfo.
That's I sorry, I was muted. It's fine. Okay.
To be more serious, I don't have a problem on this. My main concern is most of the technical decision about this should be done by SIG release, because we need to do a refactor and a code change of the different tool we use for the release process. So I felt like SIG release should own this instead of case infra.
Yeah. So the funny, tricky part about it, right, is that if we decide that it's partially based on, and I know that we're over time. I appreciate everyone who is still hanging out and indulging conversation. So the tricky part is that we have to decide on what the solution is going to look like a little ahead of time. The solution in terms of like, are we pushing to multiple registries as part of the tooling, or are we mirroring after the tooling has already pushed to GCP, right? Because if we decide that we want the tooling to be able to push to any registry, and that should be a future goal. At the baseline, we need to support artifact registry, because that's the new hotness for GCP, right? At a baseline, we need to support it, so it needs to support multiple registries in that sense. If it does not need to support an Azure and AWS, we don't need to write those code paths, right? And there is a separate tool or same tool with a different, with a different interface that does the copy from registry to registry, or maybe it's something that's handled on the cloud provider side. However that works, right? So deciding how we want the images to get from place to place will be important, right? If we decide that if we decide that we want to be able to promote to all registries, then I would say SIG release owns it. If we decide that it's we can, yeah, I mean, I think we can own it in the interim, and should we kind of like change paths at some point, then we can reassess. I think that's, so I say all of that to say that the KEP is currently under SIG architecture in enhancements, and what I can do, Hippie, if you don't mind, I can just update the owners and stuff like that and push to your branch if it's open.
Absolutely.
Cool. I'll do that. So we'll hang onto it for a bit. I think that one of the things that we would need to determine is how we want to do the distribution, and I will leave it to the conversations that will happen in Kate's infra for that.
Last thing, I mean, you just considered two options, but I want to add a third one, is the idea proposed by Jesse. I think it's a good idea. We should think about it and try to see the technical complexity of it.
So I thought Jesse's option was my second option.
Okay.
Jesse, can you confirm?
Which was your second option? Sorry.
Essentially to have the cloud providers mirror.
No. Okay. I was thinking that when Hippie and I first talked about this, I think we were talking about infra owns accounts across the various cloud providers now, and they're paying a massive pile of egress to Google for that GCR egress, and we'd like to avoid that. So I think it makes sense that you extend ownership of the registries just into different clouds, right? And that's, I'm not passionate about that, but I feel like that leaves the most ownership and control with the project. So having a mirror on Azure, having a mirror on GCP, having a mirror on AWS, et cetera, and then a gateway to point to them makes sense. Yeah, there's automation, there's a little overhead there, but I think once it's in place, it's not super rocket science, and it should look a lot like, you know, Yum and Debian, you know, apt repository mirroring that happens, and we've been doing for 30 years. So I think I think there's a precedent. I think there's a model to follow, at least to write it up and POC it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we're in agreement that the second option is the same. It's the mirror across multiple registries.
Oh yeah, I just, but not, sorry, I heard, God,
Violent
geez,
agreement.
maybe I shouldn't have had you summarize it. I heard that as the cloud providers would own that, which I don't think you want. So there you go. Yes, totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Option 2, all for it.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'll move this KEP into SIG release and update some of the reviewers and stuff.
Thank you so much.
Sweet. Thank you for all of the work that y'all have been doing to get to this point where we can even have a discussion about it.
Sure.
All right.
A lot of work in there.
Anything anyone wants to add before we wrap it up?
Thank you for being you.
All right, and we'll
Thank
thanks
you
for bringing your concerns over here, and we'll see you soon in the Kids Infra meeting.
Yep.
So thank you, and sorry for running over time, but I think it was quite productive. So see you. Happy release day. And,
See you. Happy release day.
Take it easy, everyone. Bye.